right spot there so it doesn't shake or anything during the broadcast. All right. So good to see all of you today. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you with us. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. The way we do this show generally is I give my opening remarks, and then after I give my opening remarks, I'm getting the remote just to make sure that the very real picture doesn't go away. But after I give my opening remarks, then from there, we do the roll call, and then I answer your super chat questions. Now, today's opening remarks are opening remarks I've been wanting to give for a long time. I've been wanting to give my opening remarks from today for a long time, but I didn't get them right. They were in the back of my mind for 2-3 months. I've been tinkering around with what I'm going to share with you in my opening remarks today, but I couldn't exactly find the right words. But after today, I finally found the right words to give my opening remarks the way I'm going to give them today. So I thank you all for being here, for joining us. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. We are a great community here. We're here for each other. I stream consistently. I see the same names over and over again in the super chats and in the roll call, and that's good. That is comforting. It's very reassuring. We have something here that we can depend on. As long as I am breathing, as long as our community is intact, we have something solid, something we can touch, and that is really valuable to all of us. And I'm committed to making this community continue to exist and to grow in both real life and online. I'm committed to doing these broadcasts, producing this content, writing these books, but also to building the Center for Political Innovation, building and supporting the John Brown Volunteers, Students and Youth for a New America. We are a cluster, you could say. We are a tendency, you could say. We're not a party. We're not a revolutionary movement. We're just a cluster. We're a tendency. We're a group of people that share similar values, similar desires, similar aspirations, and a similar worldview. And I, for one, am committed to keeping this community alive, and part of that is these regular streams. So there you go. Now, tomorrow will be the end of September. And it'll be the 1st of October tomorrow. So this presentation that I'm giving you tonight, it will close out the month of September. And I'm ready to give it finally. And it's very satisfying to be able to finally say what's been on my mind for a long time. But before I get into that, I do want to let you know that if you're part of our Patreon community, we will be having our patrons-only stream. It'll be tomorrow night at 10 p.m. You'll be receiving the link at some point tomorrow. Some of you have asked me to text you the link so you don't miss it, and I will just send it to you directly so that you don't miss it. We want all who are part of our patrons-only community to receive those notifications. So if you want to sign up, it's kind of last minute, but if you want to sign up and be part of our patrons-only stream on Patreon, it's right down below, so you can sign up. And like I said, just as I always do, during my opening remarks, I'll be pausing to write the super chat questions down. And that's how we roll. So with no further ado, I'll be beginning my opening remarks. So for those of you who may not be aware, today on Capitol Hill, they had hearings about Facebook. A Senate committee called representatives of the Facebook app and questioned them harshly about the impact that their app, Facebook, is having on particularly young people and teenagers throughout the United States of America. And they talked about not just Facebook, but Instagram. And I guess it's been revealed that despite some of the negative mental health effects associated with Instagram, Facebook apparently tried to cover this up because they feared it would hurt their profits, and that their own internal research was showing that the app known as Instagram had a negative effect on the mental health of young people. And it was really interesting to listen to this hearing because I was hearing many Republicans, many Democrats as well, many conservatives asking very harsh questions of the woman who is the safety representative of Facebook, the head of the safety division of the Facebook Corporation. And they were saying to her, Facebook disregards public good in pursuit of its own profits. You knew that there were negative mental health effects associated with your app, but you covered it up because you were so determined to make money. Congressman after congressman, senator after senator is asking them these questions, laying it into them. At one point, I believe one representative said, IG stands for Instagram, but it also stands for intense greed. Intense greed. And they're castigating Facebook for the fact that it has had a negative mental health effect on our next generation. And they concealed this in pursuit of their own profits. And all of their research, they don't seem to be concerned about how young people are affected by their app, by Facebook, by Instagram. Rather, they're only concerned with making money. It was fascinating to hear this conversation, right? We understand that Facebook was about to roll out a special version of Facebook they were going to call Facebook Kids. That was only available to those 13 years of age or younger. And it was going to be a special Facebook. But now they've had to delay that, to postpone it, because there's been so much outrage showing that they were not trying to protect these younger people from some of the negative effects. In fact, they were doing the opposite. They were going to encourage these young children to set up accounts that their parents didn't know about, according to some allegations. They were going to try to use this app to direct young people to Instagram, to go from Facebook to Instagram. And I'm hearing these congressmen, congresswomen, Democrats, and very conservative Republicans, a lot of them, castigating Facebook. And I'm thinking to myself, it's almost frustrating. I don't know if any of you have ever felt this before, but sometimes when something needs to be said, but it's not being said, you're hearing a conversation, and there's something that needs to be said, but it's not being said, it can be the most frustrating feeling. And I'm hearing these congressional hearings. You cared only about your own profits. You put yourself, you're just like big tobacco. I'm hearing this and I'm saying, capitalism. 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 Because these are the same representatives, especially many of the Republicans, these are the same representatives that have been telling us that the market always has the best results, that have been pushing the economic theories of Ayn Rand, who talks about capitalism as the unknown ideal, of Milton Friedman, who says the market always brings the best result. And they're sitting there talking about how this huge multinational corporation put its own profits ahead of the public good, enriched itself at the expense of young people, concealed the negative results of its behavior from the public. And that's, again, it's right in front of them. It's right in front of their eyes. Capitalism. This is capitalism. That's what capitalism is. Capitalism is a society where profits are in command. Capitalism is an economy organized to make profits for private owners of the means of production. This is what capitalism is. Capitalism is the rule. I'm hearing them talk about this, and it's just infuriating to me. It's infuriating to me. No one will point out that capitalism is the problem. And in fact, these very same voices that are constantly telling us the merits of capitalism, constantly encouraging us to believe that capitalism is a great system, those very same voices are up there castigating a corporation. How dare this corporation put the interests of its own profits ahead of public? They don't care. Instagram stands for instant greed. But of course they have to have these hearings on Capitol Hill, because the reality of what is happening to the next generation of young people in the United States has to be addressed. Red states, blue states, green states, purple states. It's happening. Younger people in the United States are in crisis. And trigger warning, by the way. Trigger warning. I'm going to talk about some heavy stuff here today. But one thing that kept coming up at this congressional hearing was that 13% of young people in Britain who are suicidal and 6% of young Americans who are suicidal did Instagram, the app, as contributing to their desire to kill themselves. 13% of young people in Britain who are thinking about killing themselves said that Instagram contributed to it. And 6% of Americans who are thinking about, young Americans, teenagers, who are thinking about killing themselves, 6% said that Instagram, the app, contributed to that. Those are not small numbers. Those are definitely not small numbers at all. That's huge. Think about that. Think about that. That is a really big deal. 13% of British young people who think about killing themselves and 6% of American young people who think about killing themselves list Instagram as a contributing factor. That is not a joke. Those are numbers you can't mess with. And we all know the suicide rate right now is the highest it has been in decades, especially since the pandemic. It was already rising very significantly before the pandemic, and now since the pandemic, the suicide rate has been rising. There's a bit of a problem. There's a bit of a problem facing the country. Bit of a problem here. And you gotta love the projection. Are folks familiar with the concept of projection? Now, this is a Freudian psychoanalytical concept called projection. The idea is you see in other people things that you see in yourself but are concealing from yourself, right? If there's something about yourself, here's the Reconciliation Day, writing it down. If there's something about yourself that you don't like, you will hide it from yourself, not acknowledge it, but you will start to instead notice it in other people constantly. You constantly see other people having this flaw that you yourself are not able to acknowledge to yourself that you have. And a great example of projection is all the insane reporting I have seen about China's social credit system. I don't know if you've seen this, but apparently, according to all the reports, China, all right, Socialists, Indigenous. Show. According to all the reports, China, they have cameras watching everyone all the time, according to the reports, and everyone is constantly being judged by their actions. And if they do the right thing, they get more points, and if they do the bad thing, they get negative points, and everyone's actions are supposedly being monitored by the Chinese government. There is 24-hour surveillance of individuals, and everyone is being rated by how good they behave, and this isn't true. The social credit system basically doesn't exist the way they describe it, right? There are individuals, for example, who have been fined by the Chinese government for breaking the law, and previously the Chinese government had no way of collecting the fines. So one thing it will do is it will block the person from getting on a flight if they don't book their, they don't pay your fine. Well, in the United States, you don't pay your fine, you go to jail. That's a little harsher. But yes, the social credit system, if you have been fined by the Chinese government for breaking the law, they'll prevent you from booking a flight or booking a train until you pay it. But it's not what they make it out to be. The reports in American media about this social credit system, and thank you, Third Rail, are far bigger and far more exaggerated than anything that's actually happening in China. They're just over-the-top exaggerations everywhere you go. If you buy alcohol, oh, that affects your score, and then if you say a cuss word in China, that's not true. It's not true. But it's projection. It's classic projection. Because why is it? Why is it that Instagram and Facebook are so bad for the mental health of young people? Why? Because it forces them to constantly be comparing themselves to other people. It forces them to be constantly checking about whether or not they are good enough. It creates a social credit system where young people are being judged by how many Twitter followers they have, how many likes they get on their posts, how many Instagram shares they get. It creates a situation where young people are constantly being subject to oversight. The oversight of their peers, the oversight of society, the oversight of anonymous people on the internet they've never met before, where you're constantly seeking the approval of others. Am I good looking enough? Am I doing well enough? Am I politically right way? Am I saying the right things? Am I doing the right things? Where you're constantly going and getting the approval of other people. Constantly being given a rating. Constantly being judged. Constantly comparing yourself to other people. And that is creating a huge amount of mental health problems. People always compare themselves to other people. People always compare themselves to other people. People always judge other people. That's always gone on. In fact, human beings define ourselves in relation to other people. It's how other people see you, how other people react to you is a pretty big part of how we human beings define ourselves. But regardless of all of that, it's awful for young people's mental health to constantly be comparing themselves to other people. And this constant rating of people, constant measurement of people, this is what employers do. It's not what the Chinese government does. This is what employers do. I don't know. I've worked at many different places in my life. I've had many different jobs. I worked at a gas station at one point. I've worked at an insurance firm. I worked as a maintenance worker at my college. I've worked in many different jobs. And many different employers will constantly be rating people, right? You get a review where your employer says, I give you 4 stars in this area, and I give you 5 stars in this area, but in this area you get 2 stars. In this area you get 1.5 stars. And many people hate this. They find it to be very degrading to have to kind of grovel before their employer and get a rating, right? Most of us, we go to work, we do our job, we go home. If our employer has a problem, tell us what the problem is. We'll make you happy, but don't put us through this process of, are you doing good enough? And in many cases, right, it's blatantly exploitive, right? You know, when I was a gas station attendant, we got a rating based on how many items of candy we sold. When people would come in to pay for their gas, we had to constantly try to upsell them and get them to buy candy because our rating would be based on how much candy we sold to people. And I mean, it was, you're constantly driving people to do what the employer wants to do, constantly rating them, constantly giving them a rating. These are mechanisms of social control. And this is how the capitalist wants his employees to be, constantly struggling to make more money for the capitalist, constantly improving, constantly becoming more productive for the employer, constantly rendering more profits. And the employer, the capitalist, sees you as a commodity, right? Your labor is a commodity, and he sees you as a commodity. Is this person, am I maximizing the value I'm getting out of them? Am I getting the most bang for my buck? I'm paying them $5 an hour, $10 an hour. Am I making enough money in return? Is this worth the return on my investment? This is capitalism. This is capitalism. This is capitalism. And this is how the capitalist sees the worker. And this is the ideal state of being for the capitalist, right? If he can constantly have the person monitoring themselves. Am I doing well enough? That the person is constantly seeking the approval of the employer, constantly striving to do what the employer says they want to do. Writing it down. Constantly trying to do that, constantly striving for the approval of the boss. This is capitalism. This is capitalism. This isn't the Chinese government. This isn't the Russian government. Right? This isn't Venezuela. This isn't Cuba. This isn't George Orwell's 1984. This is capitalism. This is capitalism. This is how capitalism is managing us, and this is how capitalism is destroying the lives of young people in the United States by subjecting them to the constant self-measurement, by subjecting them to the constant judgment, the constant comparison. This is how capitalism and the drive to make profits is destroying the next generation. This is capitalism. And these Republican congresspersons who talk about family values and young people and all of that, they really ought to think about what they preach about free markets, libertarianism. And they really ought to look into it because it's capitalism that is the root of this problem. This is not what the Chinese government is doing. This is not what the social credit system is. This is capitalism. This is how capitalism is managing the rabble. And that's been a recurring theme on these lives. I've talked about the entrepreneurial bourgeoisie that have a more libertarian perspective, and the entrenched Eastern establishment, the Anglo-American Eastern establishment, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, the Council on Foreign Relations, and their alliance with the Silicon Valley fascists, Mark Zuckerberg, whose hero is the Emperor of Rome, Caesar Augustus. His hero is Caesar Augustus, who ruled the entire world, Pax Romana. Bill Gates and his drive to reduce the human population, that there are different wings within the American power structure. There is the lower level capitalists that support Trump, My Pillow, Mike Lindell, and Betsy DeVos, and fracking companies. And then there's the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the DuPonts and the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Bill Gates, and the Trump wing favor unregulated free markets, and they are obsessed with economic growth, whereas the Bill Gates and the Rockefellers and the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Silicon Valley fascists, they're more interested in managing. They're not so interested in economic growth as they are in controlling and managing things and keeping the world as it is so they stay at the top of the pyramid. This is a divide between the entrepreneurial bourgeoisie and the managerial bourgeoisie. Ecology. Gardening. This is a divide. And that you could say that during the Reagan years, and especially in the 1990s and even up into the 2000s with Bush, this lower level bourgeoisie kind of had the upper hand. Right? The Soviet Union had fallen. They were engaging in neoliberalism. The economy was much better than it is. And there was kind of unity among the bourgeoisie. And the more libertarian elements kind of had the upper hand. Right? Privatizations were going on, liberalism, cutback, etc. But as capitalism began to enter a crisis, the most blatant example being the financial meltdown of 2008, 2009, social media emerged. MySpace first. That was the first big app I remember everyone had. And then Facebook. I remember I was on Facebook back when you had to have a college email address. You had to have an email address that ended in .edu to have a Facebook. Do folks remember that? At first, when Facebook started, you had to have .edu after your name to even get on there. Now, not anymore. That's ancient history. But with Facebook, with social media, suddenly, gradually, that managerial bourgeoisie had the upper hand. Especially coming out of the financial crisis. There was fear that there might be some kind of social explosion. There might be some new revolutionary movement or rebellion among working people. And so in response to their new innovation of managing people with social media, was the managerial bourgeoisie that started to have the upper hand. Right? In the struggle between the Eastern establishment, the Yankee and Cowboy War that Carl Oglesby talks about, the Eastern establishment with Obama and with Facebook, they had the upper hand. And one thing that significantly contributed to giving the upper hand to the Eastern establishment has been Netflix. Netflix, the TV, you can watch TV shows. It started out Netflix would send you DVDs in the mail. Right, that was a thing. You got DVDs in the mail. But then Netflix turned into this TV on demand service. Barack Obama is on Netflix. The board and Netflix was pushing politics. And it was liberal politics largely. Netflix did a lot to expose police brutality. They did a whole show about about the killing of Oscar Grant, right? They did Fruitville Station. Netflix has been somewhat liberal in the way that they put things out. But Netflix is definitely, it's not a market entity. It's not about making money, right? It's technically a private company. People make money from Netflix, but it's a monopoly. It's a monopoly, and it's more about engineering. It's more about controlling people. It's more about pushing certain political messages. Netflix is an absolute monopoly, practically. I mean, I guess you can watch Amazon video stream or whatever. U.S. cities. Netflix has an agenda. Definitely has an agenda. The Trump folks hate Netflix because they see it as more in line with the liberal bourgeoisie. They've tried to develop their own alternatives with little success. Obama is on Netflix. And, we have Netflix in my house. My wife watches a lot of Netflix. I don't. I rarely have time to watch television. But when we do, often my wife and I, we don't like the same kind of television. We don't like the same kind of TV, right? My wife likes those police shows. I cannot stand police shows, having gone to court with police brutality victims over and over and over again in Cleveland, seeing how these things really work. I can't watch police shows. My wife likes them. If you like them, I respect that. I cannot watch police shows. I hate them. I vehemently hate them because I know the reality of how rigged our criminal justice system is. But regardless, you know, every so often, my wife and I will find a show that we can agree on. It's rare, but it happens. It happens, right? And I like political stuff. My wife doesn't like that. I always want to watch political stuff, documentaries. Right? She doesn't want to watch that. So it's rare that we will find something we can agree on. She likes the cop shows, the thrillers. I like she likes rom-coms too. I don't particularly care for rom-coms. I like all this political stuff that kind of bores her. She doesn't care for. But every so often we can find a show that we can agree on. Every so often, and it's a miracle. And I'm always urging, it's kind of funny. She wants to sit there and watch everything. She just wants to sit there and, wants to watch another one and another one. But I'm trying to stop it because I'm trying to prolong us having a show we can agree on. Because once it's over, it's over. And it's funny. I'm always like, we watched one. Okay, let's wait. No, but she wants to watch it. She wants to watch it till it's done. She wants to binge watch, and I want to ration it out. It's very funny. But regardless, every so often we can find a show. We can find a show that we agree on. And that's beautiful because we can sit there and we can watch a show. Marco Polo. We can watch a show that we agree on. So, over the past couple months, labor shortage. Over the past couple months, one of the shows that my wife and I have been able to agree on, which I must say, politics aside, and I've talked about it on here before, is a show called The Good Place. Right? The premise of the show is that this woman has died. She's gone to the afterlife. She's gone to heaven, which is the good place. The bad place is hell. She goes to the good place, it's called. But they have her confused with someone else. That's the premise of the show. Now, it gets much more complicated from there. I mean, we're not even done with it, right? There's like 4 seasons. We're in the 3rd season. So many twists and turns. And it's a good program, honestly. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with the message that it's putting out largely, but it's a well-made program. It's a well-made program, right? It's entertaining. Makes you think. It's whatever. I don't agree with it, though. And that's the thing. I'm not going to be engineered. I'm not going to be engineered by it. I don't agree with it, but it's entertaining, right? It's a creative premise for a show, and perhaps maybe that's a strength that Netflix has, perhaps, right? The fact that, I doubt, if you went to ABC or NBC and you pitched a show like The Good Place, as complicated and convoluted, and, they would probably turn it down because it would be too much of a risk, right? But that's kind of the beauty of something like Netflix or PBS, right? Is that you can do experimental things that the market may not reward because you have that ability, because you're not market bound. And because Netflix seems to be this kind of virtual monopoly that's engaging in social engineering, trying to regulate us. They're not bound necessarily by the free market obsession that you have in different places. So, they're able to take the show in different directions and all of that. And that's to their credit. And like I said, it's entertaining. But here's my main problem with the show. Here's my main problem with the show. My main problem with The Good Place, right? I ranted about it before after watching like the first episode, but now after having seen almost all the show, we're on like the third season. There's 4 seasons. I'm going to tell you my main fundamental disagreement with the show, which is that the premise on the show that continues to show up throughout the program, it's a recurring theme, is that in their version of life after death, it's a lot like Instagram. It's a lot like Facebook. It's a lot like your employer. People are constantly being rated. Avakian. Wrote it down. People are constantly being rated. There is a point system, according to the fictionalized afterlife of the show. There's a point system. For every good deed that you do, you get so many points. For every bad deed that you do, you lose so many points. And where you go after you die, heaven or hell, the good place or the bad place, is determined by your score when you die. It's based on your score. That's basically a recurring theme on the show, that whether or not you go to heaven or hell is based on a mathematical calculation, adding up your good deeds and your bad deeds. And if you've gotten the right amount of points when you die, you go to the good place. And if you've not gotten the right amount of points, then you go to the bad place. That's a recurring theme. There's no spoiler alert. I'm not ruining anything for you on the show. That's a recurring theme. And in there, they're presenting the world to people like Instagram, like Facebook. Right? You're constantly being rated. You're constantly being approved by other people. You're constantly being compared to others. You're constantly getting a rating. And they are projecting the reality that is killing Zoomers, killing millennials, driving them to opioids, driving them to self-doubt, driving them to hopelessness. It's projecting this kind of social media reality, this rating like you get from your employer. How profitable are you? Land back. It's comparing that rating. It's projecting that onto the universe. And it's very funny because we just came out with this book, Jesus is a Socialist. Right? This book is now available. It's the latest book from the Center for Political Innovation. The Center for Political Innovation is not a religious organization. There are atheists in the group. There are Jews in the group. There are Muslims in the group. There are Christians like myself in the group. But we published this book to stimulate a conversation. That's why we published this book. But this book, making the argument that Christianity and socialism are compatible, small handheld book, it was the latest book that we published. But in order to put this book together, myself and Keaton Mansfield were forced to do a large amount of research. We were forced to do some reading, some studying, to make sure that we got it right. And it's very funny. Very, very, very funny. Because in the course of putting this book together, I remembered and recalled something that I had been told many times throughout my youth, throughout my Christian upbringing, which is this: there is no point system. An essential part of the Christian faith is that there is no point system. That is a big part of the Christian belief system, is there is no points. You don't go to heaven or hell based on your deeds. In fact, that's considered to be one of the great apostasies, right? The Catholic Church burned people at the stake for saying that. There were people in the year 500 who were saying, oh, you go to heaven based on how good you are. And they said, nope, and they burned him at the stake for that. And that was long. It is considered to be one of the biggest deviations of the Christian faith. The idea that you go to heaven if you do so many good deeds, you go to hell if you do so many bad. No, that is actually considered to be one of the biggest deviations, the biggest distortions of the Christian faith. And it is explicitly, if you read especially the final books of the Bible, the epistles, right, the letters, the Apostle Paul wrote, that he spends over and over again reassuring everyone that your deeds, your actions have nothing to do with whether or not you receive salvation or not. So the good place is pushing something that is entirely contrary to the entire teachings of Christianity from the beginning, right? Ephesians chapter 2, verse 4 through 10, he says, like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even though we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace that you have been saved, and God has raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms in Jesus Christ, in order that the coming age he might show the incomparable riches of his grace, expressed in the kindness to us in Jesus Christ. For it is by the grace that you have been saved through faith, and not through yourselves. It is through the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ to do good works, which God prepared for us in advance to do. Right? 2 Timothy 1 through 9, he says, he saved us and called us to a holy life, not because of anything we have done, but because of our own purpose and grace. This grace was given us by Christ Jesus for the beginning of time. Now, I'm not on here to preach a sermon. This isn't really about religion. But it's interesting. It's very, very, very interesting. Very, very, very interesting. Very, very, very interesting that Netflix is pushing something so contrary to what the Christian religion preaches, but so in line with how Facebook and Instagram is engineering us and causing so many problems for the next generation. Now, generally, and this is where I will disagree with mainstream Christianity, generally the way that this concept is taught by Christian pastors, and this is what I heard when I was growing up, is they say, well, all of us are sinners. All of us have violated and broken the rules. All of us are not good enough. If it was salvation by deeds, none of us would get into heaven, but Jesus died on the cross for our sins, and it's through God's mercy and grace that we all get to go to heaven, right? And if we can accept Jesus, if we say the magic words, right? If you say, I accept Jesus, these magical words, then all of your sins go away and you go to heaven. Well, I'm at the point where my beliefs say I don't think that's right. I think we're getting at something different here. I think there's something else. There's something else. Something else that the scripture is getting at. And it's my life experience. My experience interacting with people that tells me this. But in order to get this point, because it's not a simple point, not a simple point at all, I'm going to talk to you about Mao in China. Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Revolution. Someone that I've studied in great depth. Someone who will be remembered as one of the most important human beings in history. Mao Zedong, the founder of the Chinese Revolution. The first interview that Mao ever gave, the first interview he ever gave, was in 1937. Mao gave an interview, a lengthy interview, to an American writer named Edgar Snow. Edgar Snow was from Missouri, and he was from Missouri. He was a journalist from Missouri. He went to the Missouri School of Journalism, and he learned to speak Chinese, and he went to live in China. In 1928, he witnessed a horrendous famine where people were starving to death en masse, and in the late 1930s, Edgar Snow was dispatched to go up into the mountains to track down this legendary figure called Mao, right? In all the newspapers in the Chinese cities, they didn't even give Mao a name. They called the army that Mao led, they called it the Red Bandit Army. The Red Bandit Army. But as it looked like there might be a war with Japan, as there was increasing interest from American intelligence agencies in who Mao and the Red Bandit Army were, Edgar Snow apparently went to some Russian professors, and he got some coded messages and invisible ink and all kinds of crazy stuff. He finally arranged to go and interview Mao Zedong, the founder of the Chinese Revolution. He went up into the mountains and one place to another place, and finally he got to Mao's camp, and he interviewed Mao. He interviewed Mao Zedong, the founder of the Chinese Revolution. And he found this camp where Mao, the leader of the Chinese Revolution, was living. And he found Mao to be a very humble guy. The first time he met Mao, as Mao was talking to him, Mao started itching. And in the middle of the first conversation that Edgar Snow had with Mao, Mao took his pants off and began checking for lice. That's Mao. And Edgar Snow looked on and couldn't believe it. He said, I mean, could you imagine Mussolini taking his pants off? Could you imagine Winston Churchill or Stalin taking his pants off in the middle of an interview? But that was who Mao was. Mao lived in a cave. And in his cave, he had a box. And he sat on that box to put his boots on. And he had a cot that he slept on. And Mao lived a very humble life up there in the mountains. And Edgar Snow proceeded to interview Mao, the leader of the Red Bandit Army, in 1937. And Mao lived in this cave with his wife, with an army of thousands of people up in the mountains. And he interviewed Mao. And Mao's sitting there with his wife, and he's interviewing Mao. And he asks Mao about his childhood and his upbringing. And so Mao tells the story. He grew up in a middle-class peasant family, went to the university, got interested in communism, blah, blah, blah. But what's interesting is as Mao is telling his life story, Mao's wife sits up abruptly and is listening to all of this intently, very, very intently. And after the interview is over, Edgar Snow finds out that the reason that Mao's wife was so interested in hearing her husband's life story is because she had never heard it before. She had never heard it before. Mao's wife had never heard her husband's life story before. And this is what you need to understand. And this is what Netflix isn't getting. This is what evangelical Christians are not getting. She had never heard that story before. Because one of the rules that they had at the Red Army camp is that you didn't talk about your old life. In fact, when you came to the Red Army camp, you got a new name. You left your old life and your old name behind. You got a new name. When you were a communist, you got a new name. You got a new name, and you didn't talk about your old life. You didn't talk about your family. You didn't talk about your school. You didn't talk about the neighborhood you came from. In fact, you didn't even use your old name. You had a new name. You had a new life, and you were a communist. And so from the rank-and-file soldiers all the way up to the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, Mao, nobody talked about their old life. Nobody. It was against the rules. But what did they do? They sang. They sang all the time. They had all kinds of communist songs. They had rewritten every traditional Chinese song. They had rewritten it to be about communism. And while they were in this army camp, while they were fighting to build a new China, while they were going out on the battlefield and giving their lives for the revolution, they didn't think about their old life. They didn't even think about their old name, but they sang constantly. They filled the air with communist songs. Personality. And that was a kind of power that scared the living hell out of the Japanese. And it scared the living hell out of Chiang Kai-shek. And it scared the living hell out of the Americans. There was something happening in the mountains, in those army camps, that made the Chinese Red Army more powerful than any other army in the world at that time. And early on, people were obsessed with this. People were obsessed with it. There's even a Hollywood movie called Gung Ho. I'm glad you bought it. Glad you like it, Adam. There's even a Hollywood movie called Gung Ho that portrays a U.S. Marine Corps general who studied with Mao's 8th Route Army and uses some of the techniques of Mao's 8th Route Army to build a U.S. Marine Corps division to fight the Japanese. The Japanese couldn't understand. They could not understand what Mao was doing. Chiang Kai-shek could not understand what Mao was doing. And after the Korean War was over, the American media and American intelligence was terrified and could not understand what Mao was doing. It was so utterly amazing. That people would be so devoted to communism, to building a new China, so devoted to it, so fanatical, so willing to lay down their lives for a cause, that Red Army was unstoppable. This is where the term brainwashing comes from. Did you know this? Right, the term brainwashing became popular in the 1950s in the United States because they were trying to understand how is it that Mao and the Chinese communists were able to win so many people, to sacrifice everything, to fight so hard for their country, against the imperialists, to build socialism. And they came up with this term brainwashing because they said the communists, they must be brainwashing people. The CIA started a program called Project MK Ultra, trying to figure out methods of brainwashing people like those Chinese communists were able to do. It was something that people had never seen before. It was something utterly amazing, and it was something that scared the crap out of the imperialists. It's something the whole world was in awe of. But what's interesting is many of the people who visited Mao's camp, they said things like it reminded them of early Christianity. I believe Anna Louise Strong, Edgar Snow, they said it reminded them of early Christianity. It reminded them of the book of Acts in the Bible. It reminded them of religious fanaticism, the level of loyalty, the level of devotion that Chinese communists had. It reminded them of something that they had only seen before among religious adherents. A level of dedication, a level of fanaticism, a level of willingness to sacrifice. And this is what I think many of the young folks who are suffering on Instagram, suffering on Facebook, this is what I think that many of the Christian pastors who talk about salvation through grace, this is what I think many people who don't particularly like what I have to say, this is what I think many adherents to Western liberalism do not understand. I am going to point you toward a truth that may not go over easy. It may not be something that you want to hear, but I don't care. I'm not on here to tell you what you want to hear. I am on here to tell you what you need to hear. The second I start pandering, the second I start trying to tell you what I think will be popular, the second I start saying abolish billionaires, the second I start saying deport all white people from the United States, the second that I start shilling for the Democratic Party, the second I start calling people in red states Nazis, at that point you'll know that I'm not me anymore. I'm not on here to try and get popular. I'm not on here to try and tell you what you want to hear, what's going to get me some points with BreadTube, what's going to get me a higher rating in the algorithms. I am not here to do that. If I was on here to be popular, to become an influencer, to be the next Vosh, I would talk very differently. But I don't do that. I do not do that because I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to do something better than that. I have a responsibility to give you something that you don't have. I have a responsibility to add something to the conversation that is desperately missing in our time. That is my responsibility. And I don't care. I do not care if people don't want to hear this. I don't care if it gets me canceled or unpopular. I don't care. I am here to tell you what must be said. And I'm going to tell you this. And if you don't want to hear it, if you're not ready to hear it, that's fine. You may not be ready to hear what I'm about to say. You may be offended by what I'm about to say. You may have a negative reaction to what I'm about to say. I don't care. If you're struggling right now, if you're a young American living in the center of the empire, this is what you need to hear. And if you're able to hear this, you will be happier. Your life will improve. And if you're not able to hear this, I can't help you. I'm not going to go away. I'm still here. But if you're not able to hear this, I mean, you might as well get help from somebody else because this is what I can offer you. I can also offer you political insights and jokes and, education and analysis. But in terms of helping you be happy, not a mental health professional, definitely not a pastor, definitely not a clergyman, definitely not a spiritual teacher. I, Caleb, a guy on social media, a reporter, a communist, a writer, I can offer you this. This is what I can offer you. And if you don't want it, don't take it. And if you do want it, it'll help you. This is what I can offer you. So here we go. And it's not like a simple thing. I could just tell it to you. I have to explain it. Everything deserves context. So I told you about how Mao told his life story to Edgar Snow. And Edgar Snow listened. And his wife listened intently because she had never heard it before. I just told you that. Well, now we're going to get back to this. Right? I have many times quoted to you all Matthew 10, verses 34 through 39. Do not suppose that I've come to bring peace to the earth, because I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to turn a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. And whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. I've quoted that many times. But Jesus says something else. In the book of Luke, what does Jesus say? He says, this is what it says, Luke 14, 25 through 27. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple." What in the world is he talking about here? You know, it's really funny, right? What is one thing that evangelical Christians are always talking about? Family values. Family values, right? That's what they're always talking about, family values. Well, I mean, didn't Jesus say, if anyone comes to me and does not hate their mother and father, wife, children, and brothers and sisters? That doesn't sound like family values to me, right? When he says, I've come to turn a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, man's enemies are those of his own household. That does not sound like family values, now does it? That sounds kind of the opposite of family values, now doesn't it? Right? If Jesus was coming here to tell everyone to be a wholesome conservative Christian and homeschool their kids, and that's not what it sounds like. That is definitely not what that sounds like. But what is he actually saying there? Right? Some people read this and they say, well, Jesus was a cult leader. That sounds like a cult. He wanted everyone to abandon their families and give up everything and follow him. Some people read this and say Jesus was a real selfish MFer, right? Jesus was a real selfish motherfucker, right? He wants everyone to just, totally be devoted to him. No other friends, no other family. Well, no, that's not what it means. I am telling you based on my life experience what this means, right? And it doesn't mean Jesus was Jim Jones and wanted everyone to drink the Kool-Aid and die. And it doesn't mean that that Jesus Christ was a big narcissist and no, that's not what it means at all. I'm going to tell you what it means. I'm going to tell you what it means. It means that if you want to be happy, if you want to have a rewarding life, if you want to be at peace with the universe, you have to give up yourself. You have to stop being you. Think about who it is you are, right? You're Bob, you're Jane, your mom and dad are so-and-so, you have this as a job, you have this income, you have to stop being you. You will never be happy if you are you. You have to stop being you. And that's the curse of Instagram. And that's the curse of Facebook. And that's the curse of all of this. You will never be happy as long as you are you. As long as you are Jane or Bob, whose parents are so-and-so, whose brothers and sisters are so-and-so, whose job is so-and-so, who makes so-and-so much money, and in comparison to so-and-so and has this high-ranking score and so-and-so, as long as that's who you are, as long as that's how you define yourself, you won't be happy. The way to be happy is to stop being you. The way to be happy is to stop being you. When you stop being you, you stop being your Facebook, you stop being your Instagram, you stop being your bank account, you stop being your job, you stop being your family, you stop being your school, you stop being your community. When you stop being you, you can be happy. And when you stop being you, you can save the world. When you stop being you, and you become a revolutionary, and you become a communist, and you devote yourself to this, and you live for this, and you push the you out of your mind. When you push you out of your mind, when Bob, when Jane, when Steve, when you can push that out of your mind, but instead, you become a revolutionary. You become a Marxist. You become someone willing to fight and die for the revolution. You become somebody who understands Marxism-Leninism. You become part of the project to change human history. You become part of history's challenge. When you stop being you, when you start pushing you out and start pushing the revolution in, when you kill the part of you that wants to be you, and you let the revolutionary within yourself blossom, you can be happy. And you can find what Christians would consider to be salvation. When you connect yourself to the forces of good in the universe, when you push your own body, your own selfish needs, your own selfish desire, your own individualism, your own ranking, your own comparison to other people, when you get out of the rat race, when you stop competing, when you say, I'm done with me, you can be happy. Now that might sound wacky, that might sound bizarre, that might sound like something insane, and that might sound like something that you don't want to hear. And like I said, I don't care. But this is my experience. This is my experience. This is how I have found happiness in life. I remember how I first really got into communism. I was a preteen. I was mildly interested in communism. Didn't really know much about it, was mildly interested. Was reading about it. Started telling people I was a democratic socialist. I was 11 or 12. Didn't really know much about it. Cracked open the Communist Manifesto. Couldn't make heads or tails of it. Couldn't make heads or tails of it. Didn't know what they were talking about. But it was interesting. It seemed kind of like common sense to some degree or other, right? All these problems, environmental problems. Well, capitalists are making profits, right? Oh, we're having wars. That's the military-industrial complex. Corporations are making profits. Why don't we just get rid of profits? Why don't we just have an economy that's not centered around greed and people making profits? It just kind of seemed like common sense. But everyone said it failed everywhere it had ever been tried. And, I was tinkering around with different ideas. Was trying to just be a normal kid with a normal life, normal parents, normal children, normal brother, normal school, middle of the United States. That was me. But then 9/11 happened. And after 9/11, things in my town got rather intense. A lot of patriotic assemblies, a lot of military stuff in school, a lot of pro-war stuff. And I was against the Iraq War. And basically, my town kind of turned into a 24/7 pro-war flag-waving rally. And I didn't quite identify with that. So I started to more intensely study Marxism, study anti-imperialism. I started to get more into this stuff. My family was not particularly thrilled that I was doing this. They didn't particularly like that I was doing that. They thought I was embarrassing the family. They thought I was crazy. They thought I was a problem. They were constantly telling me to shut up about this stuff. Don't talk about this. Don't let other people hear you. People are going to think you're a terrorist. People are going to think you're anti-American. But I studied this stuff. And I'll tell you, I'll never forget the day. I was 15 years old. I went to a communist bookstore in Cleveland. My mother dropped me off. She said, "Do not leave the store." So there was a book discussion going on at this communist bookstore. And the book discussion ended. One of the communists came up to me, put his hand on my shoulder, and handed me a big stack of newspapers. And said, "All right, we're going to go sell the paper." And I was like, "You got to be joking, right? You got to be joking, right? I mean, you've got to be joking. You can't be serious." "Nope, we're going to go sell the paper." And I was thinking, you want me to walk up to people I do not know and try to convince them to pay me actual money for a newspaper about communism. And they're like, "Yep, that's what we're doing." So 15-year-old me went out on the streets of Cleveland Heights, sold communist newspapers. And it was very difficult at first. I could barely get the words out. I was stuttering the words out. You want a newspaper about communism. It was terrifying. First newspaper I sold, I was wearing my athletic jacket. The guy saw the big O on my jacket because I'm from Orrville, Ohio. And he said, "Well, I don't agree with communism, young man, but you go to Oberlin, so I'll buy your newspaper." Gave me $1, and I gave him a communist newspaper. Let's speed up. I went to college. When I was in college, I was much more actively involved in communist groups. I discovered I was quite good at selling newspapers. But the person that my college wanted me to be and the person that I wanted to be did not match. In college, I often wrote papers for college and didn't get very good grades on them. And they would tell me, "You're writing too simply." That was one criticism I often got in college. You're writing in too simply. You use too short sentences. You're not complex enough in how you explain it. Why? Because I was trying to learn to write in a very clear and coherent way. But my college was trying to teach me to write like an academic. My family didn't particularly want me to become the person I was becoming. I was writing articles for communist newspapers. I was going to protest against police brutality. I was working with labor union organizations, working with prisoners at the Ohio death row. My family didn't particularly like who I was becoming. After college, I had a bit of a difficult time finding employment. I would work at a gas station. I would get fired because I was spacey. I wasn't paying enough attention to things. I sold my blood plasma. That I used to do. I used to go to the plasma clinic, sell my blood plasma for money. Worked at call centers. I was pretty good at doing call centers. That was something I could do. I wasn't happy. Then, on my birthday, December 2010, I got on a Greyhound bus and I came to New York City. My family didn't want me to go. I didn't care. I thought I was coming to this city for a month. Haven't left since. Got on the Greyhound bus and I came to New York City. And I'm not going to get into specifics. There's a lot more I could say that I am not going to say because I'm going to maintain my privacy and because it's not important. It's not about me. There were a lot of things going on in my life at that point that were not good. There were a lot of things that had happened in my life in the lead up to that point that were not good. When I first came to New York City, this is a tough city to live in. You think it was tough to live in Cleveland at the time of the financial crisis. This city can be pretty tough. There's a lot of opportunity here, but it's also very, very tough in this city. But I was very dedicated. I made a decision that communism is where I'm at. I'm not going to be me. I left myself behind. I gave myself to this. I gave myself to this. And I discovered, with everything that was going on, with everything that was happening, as difficult as things were, I discovered that I could start to find peace by giving myself to this. I started memorizing communist speeches, communist paragraphs, communist writings, and reciting them to myself over and over again. Do you know that? It's why I'm able to end these live streams by saying a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. The danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, but revolution is the main trend in the world today. The reason I'm able to recite that is because I started memorizing these things. I also memorized the people of a small country can surely defeat aggression by a big country. That only if they dare to rise in struggle. This is a law of history. I started reciting those phrases to myself, and I discovered about how words can give you power. When you memorize things, when you are facing difficulty, you can begin reciting these phrases to yourself. When the world seems difficult, you can start reciting these phrases to yourself. You can drown out the evils of this world by reciting these phrases to yourself. Words can give you power. Words can give you power. I've told this story before, and I will tell this story again. I remember during the Occupy Wall Street protests when I had long hair. I had long hair and a beard. You've probably seen the pictures. Make fun of me all you want. But that was a good look for Occupy. Not so much a good look for other things I've done since, but it was a good look for Occupy. I had long hair and a beard. One day we had a demonstration on Wall Street, a march at Occupy Wall Street called Wall Street is War Street. That was the name of our demonstration. Beautiful banner, Wall Street is War Street. We were trying to get the Occupy Wall Street people to do more to oppose the bombing of Libya. And so we went. There was a truck that had all our signs and all our banners on it. We drove to the corner of Wall Street where there's a church, right near the park where Occupy Wall Street was. There's a church called Trinity Church. Society is more egalitarian, more wealthier, hunter-gatherer, more egalitarian. All right, very good question. That's a fair question. Egalitarian. And right next to this church, I think it's called Trinity Church, this truck dropped me off, and I was to stand there and wait while the truck parked and other people brought their signs. So I'm standing in front of the church holding a bundle of signs on a public sidewalk near Occupy Wall Street. I'm standing there on the corner by Trinity Church. And this security guard came out of the church. You know, keep in mind, I was on a public street. I was on a public street. And I'm standing there with some signs. I'm not even holding them up. They're like bundled with some signs. Standing there waiting for the, truck to be parked, other protesters to come. Waiting for this Wall Street is War Street demonstration. You can probably find video or images of this protest. A lot of people took videos. I think it was in a rap. It was in a rap video by like Immortal Technique or somebody. They showed this demonstration. You can probably see me in that video from an angle at least. So anyway, I'm standing there on the corner. And this security guard walks up to me. Walks on over to me. You can't be here. You're blocking the sidewalk. You can't be here. You can't be here, she's yelling at me. You're not allowed to be here, she's shouting at me. All of a sudden, this feeling came over me. Because I knew I had to stay there, because that's where people were meeting me. I couldn't move. I knew also that this woman was not a police officer. She had no authority to arrest me. She was a private security guard from inside of the Trinity Church. I also realized that I was standing on a public sidewalk. And so, in that moment, I just spaced out. It was like she wasn't there. It's like she wasn't there. I just stood there and looked straight past her. It was like she didn't exist. I was standing there holding these signs, looking ahead, and she was in front of me. Can't you hear me? You're not allowed to be here. You gotta move. You gotta move. And I just stood there, this blank look in my eyes. She was yelling, you gotta move. You're blocking the street. And I'm just... And she couldn't do anything at that point. She couldn't do anything at that point. She wasn't a cop. She couldn't arrest me. She definitely couldn't touch me. Security guards are told they generally can't put their hands on you. At that moment, when I didn't acknowledge her, when I pretended that she wasn't there, when I erased her from my reality, she was completely powerless. She had no power over me at that point. She didn't exist for me. Because I had given myself over to something stronger, something far more powerful. I had given myself over to something that I carried inside of me. It was far more powerful than she was. She was noise. She was a flicker in my eyelids. She didn't exist. And that is how you can find happiness. That is how you can find salvation. That is how you can become a revolutionary. Maybe this doesn't make any sense to you. Maybe you haven't lived it. Maybe this sounds like incoherent gibberish. I don't care. Again, I'm not expecting to win an award for this live stream. You know, eventually I got on a ship, risked my life trying to get to Yemen. And the port we were supposed to go to was bombed 8 times in a single day. We saw American fighter aircraft above our ship. It created an international incident. U.S. media and Israeli media was alleging that we were smuggling weapons to Yemen. And we weren't. The UN Relief Works Agency unloaded our ship and saw that we were not smuggling weapons. But I was on a ship in the Gulf of Aden trying to get to Yemen, the only American on board with a French citizen and a German citizen and a lot of Iranians. And the Israelis and the Saudis were openly talking about attacking our ship. And they bombed the port where we were headed 8 times in a single day. 2 days later, they bombed the medical university where we would have delivered our medical supplies. How did I do that? How did I do that? I'm telling you, I did that because I stopped being me. I stopped being me. I gave myself to something bigger. I stopped being a guy from Orrville, Ohio. I stopped being a guy who graduated from this high school. I stopped being this guy who did this or that. I stopped being me. And that has given me the strength. There are a lot of people that say, how do you keep doing it, Caleb? Where does your energy come from? You don't do anything but this. You don't do anything but this. How do you not burn out? Right? Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. They say, how do you not burn out? How do you not burn out, Caleb? How do you not stop doing this, right? There's people that do this for 1 or 2 years, but then they move on. How do you not burn out? I'll tell you, I burn out because I don't burn out because the part of me that burns out is gone. The part of me that burns out is gone. The part of me that would burn out, that would get tired, that would get bored of all of this, that would get exhausted, that would want to go drink at the bar and want to go dance in the club and, want to go do ecstasy and that part of me is gone. That part of me is long gone. I'm not that anymore. I'm not my body anymore. I have a body, right? But that's not who I am anymore. I gave that part of myself up. I gave myself to something higher. I make mistakes. I've made some mistakes since then. I've made mistakes more recently. I do things I regret. Sometimes I'll say something and wish I hadn't said it. Sometimes I'll do something and wish I hadn't done it. But that's not the point. The point is the way I'm able to keep going. The way I'm able to not get caught up and not be in a bad place, which I have been in some bad places in my life. I don't want to get into specifics about it. The way that I was able to not get into the trap that so many of these young folks who get caught up in Instagram and Facebook and depression and loneliness, the way that I didn't get caught in the trap that so many people our age are stuck in. The way that I have continued doing what I do is because I discovered what Mao discovered, what Edgar Snow discovered in the mountains. I discovered what other folks were talking about. I've connected to something. I've connected to something bigger. And that's what keeps me going. And I hope this is helpful to you. I hope it's helpful to you. It may be helpful to you, it may not be. You may have been ready to hear this, you may have not been ready to hear this. This may have scared you away, this may have helped you understand me. I don't care. I do care. I care about you. You're a valued member of my community, but I'm not afraid to say what needs to be said, and I'm going to say it regardless of how people react. And those are my opening remarks for tonight. I've had that rant inside of me for a long time. It's been building up. I was looking for the right words. Those are my opening remarks for tonight. The rest of this stream will be me answering super chat questions. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, names and locations, I'm here to talk to all of you. Welcome, everybody. So glad to engage with all of you. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Dylan in California, Dylan Smal. Alan in Chicago. Elias in Finland. Joey from Belize. Aaron from Brooklyn. Quinn and Meredith in Washington. Cleveland Pirate Alex. What's this here? Hey, Caleb, you're killing it. I love you, Crystal. Well, thank you, Crystal. You know, Lexingwana Crystal, thank you very much. It's very kind of you. Northern Cali, Wisconsin. Bobby from Austin. OP, Florida. Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Flushing, Queens. Natalie, shout out to you, Natalie, student for a new America. Arturo from Alaska, Dustin in Sanford, Dario in Brooklyn, Dario from Brooklyn, very, very good. Minnesota, Micah, Las Vegas, New York City, Kinky, JT24, Ben from Edinburgh. Time for a Scottish CPI. Email me about how to do that. Carolyn Conway says inspirational. Chris from Philly. Jenny Lynn from Cincinnati, Ohio. Cole from Calgary. Io in New York. Shout out to you, Io. Shout out to you, Northeast U.S. Mike from North Carolina. Robert from the U.K. Newark, Cincinnati. Woody from Calgary. Chaya from Montreal. Carolyn from Brooklyn. Cincinnati, Ohio. John in Tucson. The Rose, thank you, Caleb. Paul from California, Ramsey, Patty and Joshua Tree, John in Houston, Rice from Adelaide, Australia, Neo Fraser in Hong Kong, Carl from X from Iceland, Bayonne, New Jersey, Red Illuminati, shout out to you, loved member of this community, Roger from Sacramento, Lex from Austin, Vinicius from Brazil, here again and loving it, says William Kane. Chris in Salt Lake City. Sam working hard in Australia. Big Al in Chichester, New York. Icelandic Socialist Party. Richie Bruce in Staten Island. Shout out to you. Good times, good times. Mohsen from Iran. Toronto. Juan from Puerto Rico. Gabby from Chicago. Whitby Island, Washington State. Tushar. What a speech. Caden, Mike from Utah, Ireland, Mo from Pomona, California. Wow, good stuff, folks. Good stuff. Scotland, San Francisco. David Rojas from San Francisco. Shout out to you, Mr. David Rojas. Shout out to you. Great times that we're having here. Folks, if you want to be part of the patrons-only stream that is happening tomorrow at 10 p.m., by all means, sign up. The link is right down below in the description. It's last minute, but if you want to be part of the patrons-only stream, now is the time to sign up. Link is down below. Hope you liked it. Be sure to tweet this out, share this. If you liked this presentation, try to help other people hear it. The more people, the more fun we have. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. You know, we're having a great time here. Shout out to Edward. Edward has been helping us. We have a podcast now. Shout out to you, Edward. You're a beloved member of this community. We have a podcast. If you go to the cpiusa.org, you click podcast. There's podcasts. If you want to listen to this on Spotify, a lot of these presentations are available now on Spotify, thanks to Edward's hard work. You know, we're doing great stuff here, folks. So if you want to be part of the patrons only stream, sign up down below. And keep in mind, we have this new book, Jesus is a Socialist, People's Republic of Yemen. All right, it's the Democratic People's Republic of DPRY, Yemen. If you wanna be part of that, sign up. We have this new book, Jesus is a Socialist. You can order it today. Get your copy today. If you're interested in getting it in bulk, if you want to get bulk rates of it, you can message me. I can arrange for you to get them in bulk. So just send me a message, and I'll try to see if we can get you a bulk shipment of these, because we just want it to get everywhere. This book wasn't written to make money. We're not making very much money off of it. It is written to get into people's hands. It is to get into people's hands. And if you know somebody who would benefit from reading this, if you feel like you could distribute this, send me an email. We'll make it happen. We need to get this out there. Jesus is a Socialist, or any of our other books. If there's other books we put out, you want to message me, I can get you a bulk rate on those as well. We're doing great stuff here, folks. We're doing great stuff. So there you go. Shout out to the John Brown volunteers. They are out, canvassing and spreading a revolutionary message, every day in New York. We're thinking about sending them to Texas pretty soon. We've got a real organization here growing. We are, like I said, we are a tendency, right? We are a group of people with similar ideas, with a similar perspective, and we're doing great stuff. Thank you, David. Just in Ballarat at the moment, home of Eureka Rebellion of 1854, donation to the John Brown Volunteers. Thank you, David, very much for your donation. It is greatly appreciated. The John Brown Volunteers are out there every day. If you want to become a John Brown Volunteer, we would like to make that happen. I'm not saying we'll be able to make it happen. It's a little bit difficult. It's a little bit of a struggle to keep the John Brown Volunteers going. It's not easy, but if you want to become a John Brown Volunteer, by all means, contact me, because we need more people doing this. It can be difficult to facilitate it, but we need it to be done. It really needs to be done. So hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notifications bell. All right, so the rest of this live stream will be me answering people's super chat questions. So if you have more super chat questions, I will just keep writing them down and keep answering them. So, here we go. I'm very tired at this point. That opening rant took a lot out of me, but that's okay. I am going to keep going until we're done here. I may be exhausted by the end of this, but that's okay. All right. Someone asked that we have a moment of silence for the Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Very good. Okay, we had a moment of silence for the Day of Truth and Reconciliation. So I'm glad that person raised that. That's certainly very important regarding events in Canada. Now, how should socialists relate to Indigenous people? Well, the main thing is to respect their right to self-determination. Right? The Indigenous people have the right to determine their own destiny, as do all colonized people in the world, including those colonized within U.S. borders. Black people have the right to determine their own destiny as a people. Chicano people have the right to determine their own destiny. And some Indigenous people want to integrate to some degree or other, right? If you go, I have been to Native American reservations. I actually spent a couple weeks at one when I was in high school. And there are some Indigenous folks who are very religious and conservative and serve in the military. And there are some Indigenous folks that are the opposite and want to separate from the United States, want territorial autonomy. And that is for the Indigenous people to work out. We shouldn't project onto them what they want. The main thing is to respect their self-determination and to recognize that, yes, they do deserve some reparations for what was done to them. I mean, they have been, devastated economically, right? Europe, like Nordic. Okay, and libertarians understand capital. Right, just writing down the super chats. But yeah, the main thing is to respect their self-determination, recognize that they do have the right to determine their own destiny, recognize that they have the right to to make their own decision about integrating or separating, recognize that they clearly are owed something, reparations, but stop projecting onto them, and we'll get into that later. Would I ever set up a call-in show? Would I ever set up a call-in show? Libertarianism, just neoliberalism for hipsters. For hipsters. I don't have the technology right now to set up a call-in show. I would be open to doing that, but you have to be very careful, right? We get a whole lot of raids and people acting crazy on these streams. So if we would obviously have to have someone to screen the calls. We would obviously have to have technology with which to do that. I don't have that capacity. I'm streaming right now on my phone. I'm talking into my iPhone right now. Now, if we had the capacity, I would love to have a call-in show. It would make this show far more interesting, but we need to figure out how to do that, and we need somebody to volunteer to be a call screener, and we would need to, have the appropriate technology. So yeah, I'm open to it. Sure, I would love that. It would make this a lot more interesting, I think. It'd be a lot more fun, I think. All right, would I interview Vijay Prashad? Absolutely, I would interview him. If he wants to be interviewed by me, I would love to interview him. His work on China is very good. His academic work on Marxist economics, on India is very good. I saw him give a great presentation about the support of the black liberation struggle from the Soviet Union. He's a great guy. Vijay Prashad is great. I'd love to talk to him. I would love to interview him. Someone said, ecology without class struggle is gardening. That's interesting. That's an interesting quotation. I'm not quite sure what that really means, but, the thing is that, that a lot of the environmental movement is just kind of anti-human. They see human beings as the problem. Obviously, the main point of environmentalism is that the way we operate and interact with our natural resources needs to be sustainable. Right? If we don't manage natural resources in a reasonable way, if it's all just being whatever is in the short-term interest of individual capitalists, we're going to have a problem. And that's what we're facing right now with global warming and climate change and some other stuff. So, obviously the way we interact with nature needs to be done in a rational, long-term, centrally planned way. And only socialism can offer that. That's not to say socialist societies don't make mistakes, but a lot of the ecology folks, they just think humans are the problem. There's just too many of us, we're breeding too much, growth is bad, go back to nature, human beings are the problem, and they're wrong about that. So, the Malthusian perspective is wrong. Right? The anti-humanist perspective, the occult perspective is wrong. But the Marxist perspective is, yes, we need to manage our natural resources in a long-term, sustainable way. And, the greed of capitalists, the capitalists are, as I believe some revolutionaries put it, they are not fit caretakers of the earth. So there you go, right? All right. Would U.S. cities be a hot spot for the revolution? What does that mean? What does that mean, a hot spot for the revolution? I don't advocate violence. I do not advocate violence. I advocate a peaceful transition to socialism. If there's violence, that's up to the capitalists. If the capitalists decide that violence is necessary and are going to engage in violence to suppress the people's democratic struggles for justice, that's the capitalist decision. But revolutionaries do not advocate violence. They advocate a peaceful transition to socialism. They put forward a program, real policies that could be implemented to transition to socialism. Right now, one of the problems of the socialist movement is that it is concentrated in urban centers, right? In most cities in the United States, it tends to be like this. You have the suburbs where the middle-class people live, right? And then in the urban centers, you have the impoverished folks, African Americans, Latinos, impoverished folks, and then in the middle of Pittsburgh, in the middle of Cleveland, in the middle of Detroit, you have this area. I don't know what you want to call it. There's usually a university there. In New York City you have Harlem, but then there's Columbia in the middle of it. In Cleveland you have Cleveland. You have East Cleveland, the east side of Cleveland, but in the middle of it is Cleveland Heights, where Case Western Reserve is. And it's this thing that happens that, okay, in the United States, cities, you have wealthy suburbs, you have impoverished urban centers, which tend to be African American, and then right in the middle of the impoverished urban center, you have a big college, and at that college, that's where you find communists, right? Around that college, the neighborhood around that college, Cleveland Heights, near Columbia University, that's where you find communists. And that's where communists are in the United States. If you want to find communists, go to the prestigious university in the center of an impoverished urban center, and that's where you'll find communists. Cleveland Heights was where I found communists when I was in Ohio. That's where you find communists in Ohio, you go to Cleveland Heights. You want to find communists in New York City, you go to Harlem, and you go to the white area around, near Columbia University in the center of Harlem. That's a nightmare, and that's what I mean about out of the movement to the masses, right? That is never going to make the revolution. All right? The broad masses of people are not in the tiny little intellectual bohemian hub in the center of the impoverished urban city. That's the broad masses of people. This is a very big country. Very, very big country. Glenwood neighborhood in Greensboro, North Carolina, Dust James says. Exactly. This is how it tends to be. This is a big country. The United States is a very big country. Outside of the cities, there are suburbs. Outside of the suburbs, there are rural areas. And if we want to get to the broad masses of people, we need to get out of the movement and get to the masses. And the way communists operate, they're in these kind of bohemian centers that were the centers of protest in the 60s generally. That's Cleveland Heights, right? Cleveland Heights was the center of hippy-dippy stuff in the 60s. That's not going to work. We got to get to the masses. Get to the masses. Out of the movement to the masses. All right. Have you seen Marco Polo? Is that a Netflix show? Someone asked that when I was talking about Netflix. I haven't seen it. I don't watch Netflix very regularly. But I think that must be a Netflix show. Someone was asking about it. I haven't seen it. No, I have not seen it. I have not seen Marco Polo. How will NYC be different under Eric Adams? I don't know. I mean, Bill de Blasio and Eric Adams are from a similar faction. Now, Eric Adams may be slightly more pro-NYPD because he is himself a former police officer. It may be a more pro-police environment, but still the NYPD doesn't like him. The NYPD doesn't like the city council. They don't like the Democrats. NYPD is a much more Trump-ish outfit, so it might be slightly more pro-NYPD, but I don't think it won't be like it was with Bloomberg. We're not going to have Bloomberg's police state back because there's a fight between the NYPD and the city council right now. Eric Adams is pretty solidly on the side of the city council. So I don't think we're going to shift fully into the NYPD camp, but we shall see. We shall see. At the end of the day, a lot of this isn't up to individual politicians. You have to remember, a lot of this is up to the balance of forces at any given time. What's going on with the labor shortage? Well, right now, so many Americans have gotten accustomed to a lower standard of living. Throughout the pandemic, we all started having less, right? This is what the environmentalists want. This is what BreadTube wants. We're all having less, right? The pandemic's great. Everyone has less. And everyone's an individual. They're isolated from each other, right? The BreadTube should love the pandemic, right? Everyone has less. Everyone's income has gone down, and everyone's isolated from everyone else. We're individuals. None of that collectivist, Nazi totalitarian communist stuff, right? Right? Pro-nuclear power environmentalist. All right. Sometime later and talk about him. Look him up. Michael Berger. Environmentalist. BreadTube should love the pandemic, but during the pandemic, everyone got accustomed to staying at home and to not having a very big income. And so now we're trying to get out of the pandemic and get back to the United States, but a lot of people have just gotten used to having so much less, number one, and to staying at home. So the employers are like, okay, we want to turn this back on. We want to start making profits like we used to, but you can't because everyone's got less and everyone's used to staying at home. It's a mess. Bob Avakian. Bob Avakian is the son of a federal judge, not a federal judge, a state judge. His father was Spurgeon Avakian, who was on the California State Supreme Court for a while. Was actually born in Armenia. His father was. He was born here in the United States. He lived in Berkeley, California. That's in the Bay Area. His father was a very prominent judge in the area. During the 1960s, Bob Avakian became sympathetic to the Black Panthers and to student activism. And so Bob Avakian, he started working with the Peace and Freedom Party of California, and he was a supporter of the Black Panthers. Eventually, he started his own communist group called the Bay Area Revolutionary Union. Eventually, that just became the Revolutionary Union. It went national. 1975, it became the Revolutionary Communist Party, which is a Maoist communist group that still exists. They have some bookstores. They have a newspaper. What do you want me to say about them? I mean, they're ultra-left. I would say they're ultra-left. They boycott elections. They don't participate in labor union work. They argue that only what they call the lumpen proletariat, which they think means black people, is revolutionary. Lumpen does not mean black people. That's a misinterpretation of what Marx said. Number one, and number two, the lumpen actually ultimately is not revolutionary, right? When you talk about people, the lumpen really refers to desperately poor and like criminal elements, and they're not revolutionary. They're just so desperate. They're not, it's the laboring masses, the broad masses of working people, which most black people in the United States are part of the working class. They're not lumpen. Most black people are not lumpen. They're going to make, they are the ones who communists are trying to recruit. But the RCP, they're an ultra-left sect. They emphasize violence in their rhetoric. They emphasize the F word and cussing. They don't have a relationship with any existing socialist country. They declare all the socialist countries of the world to be revisionist or state capitalist. They're ultra-leftist. They're an ultra-leftist organization. They do good work around police brutality. They're very dedicated to opposing police brutality over the years, very consistently dedicated to opposing that, and that's a good thing. And they had in 1976 for the bicentennial, they did an amazing march called "We've Carried the Rich for 200 Years. Now Let's Dump Them Off Our Backs," and it was a huge demonstration, against the bicentennial of the United States. And there's an amazing photograph that comes out of that demonstration. That's called, it shows a whole bunch of Vietnam veterans in uniform marching, and they said, "We won't fight another rich man's war." That's amazing. That was good stuff. The group was heavily infiltrated by the FBI. The group has been subject to a lot of persecution. A lot of RCP members have gone to prison. There was a woman in Cleveland, an activist in Cleveland, who went to prison for burning the American flag. And she did 2 years in prison. I think it was the RCP who actually took the flag burning issue to the Supreme Court, and it was a guy named Gregory Johnson, a member of the RCP, who burned the American flag at the Texas Republican Convention and was sentenced to a jail term. And he took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overturned his conviction and said it's legal to burn the American flag. They're a group. They're around. They're much smaller than they once were. At one point in the 70s, they were, some people estimate 5,000-6,000 people. Now it's a couple dozen people. And the cult of personality around Avakian is very extreme. They consider him to be above Mao, above Lenin. He's this kind of infallible, godlike figure who can do no wrong and has developed a new synthesis of communism. Nothing about economics. It's all just the state is bad, but we're going to take over the state and make everything good. It's a lot like, I would argue that they're Blanquists. Louis Auguste Blanqui was kind of the ultra-leftist who was very prominent within the Paris Commune. And I would argue they're kind of an ultra-leftist sect. But I'll give them credit where credit is due. And they are, one thing that I will give them credit for is they're very open about being communists. They don't hide their politics. They go around talking to people about communism, which most communist groups don't do. Most communist groups have it in their head that they're going to work inside the labor movement secretly, or they're going to work, they're just going to pretend to be liberals. And no, the RCP, the RCP is very public, very, very public, very, very public in the name of communism. And I give them credit for that. CPI looking into how workers can organize outside of trade unions, right? Workers. All right, just writing down the super chats. Organize outside of unions. Get around union laws. All righty. Next question. Land back. Here's the thing. There are some indigenous folks in the United States who want autonomy. They want their own territory where the U.S. government has no jurisdiction. They want to be separate from the United States. And if they want that, I would be for making sure that they got that. Many Native Americans in the United States want reparations. I'm obviously for that. There are many Native Americans who don't want territorial autonomy. And there are some Native Americans who vote for Republicans, serve in the military. A lot of Native Americans serve in the military. A lot of Native Americans are very patriotic. So again, this is something the indigenous people, have to determine for themselves. But land back is this internet meme. It's this dumb internet meme by white people. And they've decided, a bunch of white people have decided that all white people must be deported from the United States because we're all Euro settlers and we're racist. And it's an excuse that Jason Unruhe uses for why you're not allowed to believe in class struggle and why you're not allowed to preach socialism in the United States. And it's a dumb internet thing. Okay, there may be some indigenous folks who believe in this, but I haven't met them. Right? It is mainly, it's a thing that Maoist, third worldist internet Maoists use so they can feel superior to all of the other people. That's all it is, right? It's their excuse to not participate in the class struggle, and it's childish, and you can derail any progressive struggle with this land back stuff. And I tweeted that out, and someone said, that never happens. Yeah, it happens. It definitely happens. During Occupy Wall Street, so many people came and said, you can't call it Occupy Wall Street because that land is already occupied. It use indigenous land. Okay, you know what I mean? And fact. 2017, the teachers of West Virginia went on strike. The teachers of West Virginia went on strike, and the local branch of Workers' World Party at the time was dominated. Now, there were some people there who didn't agree with it, but it was dominated largely by third worldists, Maoist third worldists. And so these Maoist third worldists, instead of supporting the teachers' strike, wrote a statement that the teachers were privileged white settlers, and instead of striking for higher pay, they should pay reparations to the Native Americans whose land they stole. And then they, below their statement about why they didn't support the teachers' strike, they wrote, one settler, one bullet. So basically, this land back stuff was used by third worldists to scab on a teachers' strike in West Virginia, right? When the company thugs in West Virginia used to shoot striking workers, the third worldists, because they hate white people and they're so edgy, and they're all white too, which is what makes it so silly. Right? They didn't want to support the teachers' strike because some of them were Trumpers or some of them were evangelical Christians or whatever. So they wrote this statement not supporting the teachers' strike and instead saying one settler, one bullet, basically calling for the killing of the teachers that were on strike rather than supporting them. And instead of the Workers' World Party disciplining these young people, what they did is they went after the Detroit branch of the party that fought with them. The Detroit branch of the Workers' World Party, differences aside, is very labor-oriented and committed to labor unions. And they were busing their members in from Detroit to support the West Virginia teachers. And the leaders of Workers' World Party, Sarah Flounders, Larry Holmes, and Fred Goldstein, instead of opposing, the scabbing third worldists, they attacked the Detroit branch of the Workers' World Party because they're all about pandering to ID poll. I've seen this. Don't tell me this has never been done. This land back stuff, right? I am for autonomy for indigenous folks. I am for self-determination, for reparations, but this no one can ever protest anything because they're all a bunch of, Euro settlers. That's used to justify scabbing. It is. Brian Berletic, New Atlantis, has been urging a chat between the two of you. I haven't heard about this, but I'm open to it. I haven't heard about this, but I'm open to chatting with him. I don't know who he is, but I'm open to chatting with him. That has been used to justify scabbing. It has been used it was attacking Occupy Wall Street. You could use it against any progressive struggle. When women were organizing for the right to vote. Oh, but if women vote, they're legitimizing a settler government. No, you can't march for the right of women to vote. Oh, what? Black people want to oppose Jim Crow segregation. Oh, they just want to be equal members of an evil settler regime in the United States. It's a dumb meme, okay? We get it. It's true. The United States was founded on the genocide of Native people. That happened. I don't deny that. I am for self-determination. I'm for reparations. But you can derail any progressive struggle by saying this. And this is the excuse that Jason and others use to not engage in class struggle. It was the excuse that West Virginia Workers' World Party people used to scab on the teachers' strike. And it was supported by Larry Holmes and Sarah Flounders and Deirdre Griswold and Fred Goldstein, who are scum and who have destroyed what was once a strong working class party because of their egos. And no, I don't support this. I don't. I'm not going to play this land back game. I'm not going to play this game. I am for a government of action that fights for working families. I am for a new United States refounded on new anti-racist, anti-imperialist values. But I'm not for no one can ever do anything because this is an evil settler country. If you feel that way and you are white, leave the country. Your logic says you're on stolen land. If you're a white person and you want to do this land back thing, deport yourself. Deport yourself. That's what you need to do. If you feel that way, if you are a white American and no one's allowed to protest anything and no one's allowed to say that they believe in American socialism because then they're a Nazi, because this is an evil settler country. If you feel that way, live true to your principles and deport yourself. And go and be Norway's problem. Go and be Sweden's problem. Go and be England's problem. But don't tell me what I can do. I believe that we have a responsibility here in the center of the empire to organize and mobilize resistance. I believe it is our job, it is our responsibility here in the center of the empire to win working people in this country to be anti-imperialist. And it's going to be hard, and it's going to be difficult, and they're going to spit on us, and they're going to reject us, and we have to keep going. It is our responsibility as Americans in the center of the empire. It is our responsibility to win people to anti-imperialism. I don't care if it's hard. I don't care if it's too difficult. I don't care if it triggers you. I don't care if you feel like just sitting at home and playing video games and feeling superior about yourself. I don't care. It is your job. It is your job as an American at the center of the empire to try and win American workers, black, white, Asian, Latino, to anti-imperialism. That is your job. And if you don't do it because it's too hard and you just want to sit around and say, oh, we're all on stolen land, you're not doing your job. You are in dereliction of duty. I charge you with being in dereliction of duty as an anti-imperialist. I'm sick of this game. I'm so sick of this game, this word game that people play. Oh, no one's allowed to be a communist. We're all on stolen land. Go screw yourself. Go screw yourself. I would never say that to an indigenous person who feels that way. That's different. But I'm sorry. If you're a white communist and you are going around saying, oh, no one should protest. Oh, we can't talk about American socialism. Oh, we can't have teachers in West Virginia should pay reparations. They shouldn't go on strike. One settler, one bullet. Shut up. Shut up. You know, I'm tired of performative politics. I'm really tired of it. Do you know what real anti-imperialism looks like? Real anti-imperialism means that you support Minister Farrakhan. You support a black nationalist revolutionary, and you get canceled for it by Thought Slime. You get hate. People call you a neo-Nazi, but you won't back down from it because you support black nationalism. That's real anti-imperialism. You know what real anti-imperialism is? Real anti-imperialism is standing with Russia and pointing out that Russia is a progressive anti-imperialist country fighting the imperialists, even if you get canceled for it on social media. Real anti-imperialism is exposing the lies about China and saying our enemy is on Wall Street, it's not in Beijing, and we need to stand in solidarity with China. Real anti-imperialism is going to Iran and standing with the Iranians and refuting the lies about Iran. Real anti-imperialism is taking the hard, difficult anti-imperialist positions, going to your working class brothers and sisters in the United States and winning them to see who their real enemy is. That's real anti-imperialism, my friend. Real anti-imperialism is not sitting there and going, I can spell America with 3 Ks. That is not anti-imperialism. That is not real anti-imperialism, my friend. That is not real anti-imperialism. Real anti-imperialism isn't calling people Nazis because they say that we need to develop our own unique kind of socialism in America. That's not real anti-imperialism. And I'm tired of your gesticulating and performing to try and show the world how so woke and revolutionary you are. No, real anti-imperialism is building a real working class anti-imperialist movement that can actually win. That's what real anti-imperialism is. Real anti-imperialism is standing with black nationalists. Real anti-imperialism is standing with the Iranians. Real anti-imperialism is standing with Russia, with China, with Venezuela, with Cuba, with Nicaragua. That is real anti-imperialism, my friend. And you're gesticulating and talking and yelling about how anti-imperialist you are. It's cowardly. I don't care about it. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of the performative politics. tweeting at the end of the day is not revolutionary. Tweeting is not going to save the world. Building a real movement and not, that is going to save, class struggle is important for Indigenous rights. I agree. How do these debates over land back compare to the way racism was used to divide the labor movement? Isn't the answer for communists to take up Indigenous issues to prevent scabbing? Sure. And I mean, again, I am for standing with the Indigenous people. I am for their right to self-determination. I am against what the U.S. government has done to them. And that's all that needs to be said. I mean, it's pretty simple. Just like any colonized people, they have the right to self-determination. But, that's really what it gets down to. And, and who, just so you know, just let's just throw this out there. Do you know who one of the main proponents of this land back stuff is? Just so you know, just throwing it out there. Do you know one of the main proponents of land back and the idea that all the white people of the United States are all the evil oppressors, and that's why you're not allowed to be a communist here? Ward Churchill. And do you know what Ward Churchill did? Ward Churchill worked with the Contras of Nicaragua when the CIA was sending guns to crack-dealing murderers in Nicaragua to overthrow a socialist government. Ward Churchill thought it was okay because the Sandinistas believe in white European Marxism, even though the majority of people in Nicaragua are of indigenous heritage, even though the Sandinistas, So Ward Churchill went to Nicaragua with Russell Means to do the work of the CIA. He worked with the Contras. Iran-Contra, this Reagan scandal, the people who brought crack to the United States. Ward Churchill worked with them in the name of this. So, you want to tell me, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz wrote a very good memoir of the Contra War and showed how the indigenous movement was infiltrated by the CIA regime change industry. And this, all white Americans are the enemy, they're all Eurocent. The CIA has no problem writing, bankrolling that stuff. Because you know what? The Eastern establishment, they think the same thing. Why do you think they're trying to, they've got 13 Reasons Why on Netflix and teenagers are killing themselves? Because they see the broad masses of Americans as a problem too. They want to get rid of us also, right? I mean, they want to dissolve the United States into a global, open international system. Why do you think they've got Instagram killing people? What are we talking about on here? What are we always talking about on here? Right? The Eastern establishment, the CIA, the Malthusians, they don't care for the broad masses of Americans either, right? So, this idea that the broad masses of Americans, American working people are the enemy, they deserve to be poorer, they deserve to disappear, that is the political viewpoint of the wealthiest capitalists in the United States. There's the viewpoint of the wealthiest, most wealthy capitalists in the United States. It's not a revolutionary viewpoint, and it must be said. All right. The personality profile of Huey Newton. Well, actually, there is a one-man play, called Huey, that you can get a VHS videotape of or a DVD of. I think it's probably all online at this point. And many people who knew Huey Newton said that it did actually capture his personality, interestingly enough, Huey Newton. If you want to kind of delve into the personality of Huey Newton, I would recommend watching that one-man play. You can watch it on the internet where they have a guy play Huey Newton. The other thing is, if you read his memoirs and you read biographies of Huey Newton was a highly intelligent person. He was very brilliant. He lived at one point by shortchanging. Have you ever heard of this? This is when, it's when people go to a store and they trick the clerk into giving them too much change. Huey Newton didn't have a job for a long time. He was able to live by shortchanging people. Now, that's obviously dishonest. I don't advocate people doing that. But do you know, that was his paycheck, was shortchanging, right? That is, I cannot even understand the level of ability to manipulate people, the ability, the level of charisma you would have to be able to pay your bills by being a shortchanger is utterly amazing to me. He must have really known how to organize people and to work with people. And and this is the thing, right? If you read Huey Newton's autobiography, he was reading Plato and Socrates when he was a teenager, right? He was, listening to Beethoven and Bach. This idea that if you're a woke leftist, you can't ever read Plato and Socrates and those dead white guys, and you have to only listen to rap music because the rest of it's that wasn't Huey Newton's approach. Huey Newton was a very brilliant person, but he was self-educated, and he taught himself. He studied philosophy. He studied economics. His writings are very good. His writings, if you can get the copy of the writings of Huey Newton, that's really good stuff. So Huey Newton is someone I respect a lot. Unfortunately, he was subject to a huge amount of state repression and violence and terror. And because of that, that caused him, it took a toll on him and probably ultimately contributed. We don't know the exact circumstances of his death. But it took a toll on him on a personal level. I mean, the Black Panthers was like something the U.S. government had never seen. It was a real revolutionary group. So there you go. Okay. Marxism, how do you combine it with religious fervor? Well, that's what many people have pointed out, that the dialectical materialist viewpoint, there is a rigidness to it that kind of, on some level, suppresses the spiritual fervor that revolutionary movements need. And that is one criticism. I'm not a full-on solid dialectical materialist. I do believe in God. I do believe that words give power and such. So, while overall I tend to agree with dialectical materialism, that is a fair criticism of it. All right. Now, this is an interesting question. It's an important question. It's a very important question, and I'm glad I was asked this because it's something I get a lot. People say this is a whole. The person who presented the super chat said, "You say, Caleb, that class society and hierarchy is based on scarcity. What about hunter-gatherer civilization and how it was the most egalitarian, but yet it had far less wealth?" Aha. Good question. And here's an important distinction we want to make. Hunter-gatherer civilization was certainly the most egalitarian form of civilization that we've ever seen. There were no classes. The whole tribe of 20 to 30 people were equal pretty much, right? Maybe if you killed the animal, you got the best cut of the meat because you're the one who killed it. Maybe they gave priority to elderly folks. I believe there was some belief that women were spiritual, especially older women. There was like the mother goddess religion practices, so older women had some, privileges. But other than that, everyone was pretty much equal. But egalitarianism is not the opposite of authoritarianism. And from what we can gather, hunter-gatherer civilizations, while they were egalitarian, meaning there was a huge amount of equality, they were very authoritarian. These people were barely surviving. There was a life expectancy of like 30, right? Like late 20s, people died. Very few people lived very long, and they were hunting and gathering every day just so they could eat. Now, do you think in a tribe of 20 to 30 people who you are depending on so you can eat, that if somebody's like, hey, I'm not going to work. You guys do the work and I'll eat it. Do you think that they responded to that person with, oh, okay, just do your own thing? No. I can guarantee you that despite the fact that it was egalitarian, hunter-gatherer civilization was also very authoritarian. People didn't just do their own thing. People who didn't follow the rules of the tribe, didn't pull their weight, were met with harsh punishment. There was certainly authoritarianism in hunter-gatherer civilization, but it was egalitarian, right? And also, you have to remember that the emergence of hierarchy was in response to the failure, right, of social hierarchy, not authoritarianism, because authoritarianism was there as part of the collectivism of those tribes, but the hierarchy was in response to the failure of it, right? When we started domesticating animals and such, that's where the hierarchies emerged, right? Tankies and MLs, the same. That's where the hierarchies emerged. And the hierarchies were based on the private ownership of land. And it was to get to a higher, more productive stage. So there you go. But that's a fair question, and it's important to get into this. But yes, I maintain that social hierarchies are largely rooted in scarcity. And that overcoming that scarcity leads to that. So there you go. Now, the person asked about the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen. That was a socialist country. Half of Yemen was at one point a socialist country. South Yemen, it was called, just like there's North Korea and South Korea. Well, South Yemen was socialist and North Yemen was capitalist. And there is something in Yemen today called the Southern Movement. And those are communists in South Yemen who want to restore the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen. And it was more prosperous, and the culture is different. Northern Yemen is much more mountainous. The people there live in much more like rural conditions. South Yemen, you have ports, you have more cities and such. And many people from Yemen have told me we're two different countries, right? North Yemen and South Yemen are two different countries. And the Houthis, what they want is autonomy. They don't want to force their religion and their political views on all of Yemen. They want South Yemen to be able to do its thing. They want their areas to practice Shia Islam. They want other regions to, do their thing. The Houthi group in Yemen does not have any illusions. They are a religious minority. Most Yemenis are not Zaydi Shia Muslims like they are. All right. Will socialism in Europe be like the Nordic countries? No, the Nordic countries do not have central planning. They have capitalist economies with lots of social programs. Socialism is when the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not profits. So yes, the Nordic models, those are social democratic welfare states in imperialist countries. That's a different thing. All right, libertarianism is just, our libertarians don't understand that capital trickles upward. Yes, wealth tends to centralize, especially in an economic crisis. Some companies go out of business, others stay afloat. And so yes, wealth centralizes in the hands of the few. And this is what Marx wrote about, the general law of capitalist accumulation. And that's why the government is constantly stepping in to break up monopolies, because what happens in capitalism is wealth centralizes and centralizes and centralizes. And then you get a monopoly, and then you have monopolistic stagnation. So the capitalist government is constantly trying to, the general law of capitalist accumulation, centralize, centralize, centralize. Some businesses expand, others die, expand or die. And then you get a monopoly, and then the state has to step in and break up the monopoly. And this is a problem in capitalism. Libertarians don't get that. They think the market, the free market and competition just continues indefinitely. It does not. I've heard people say like, oh, capitalism is not a zero-sum game. Eventually it is. Eventually it is. During the boom period, it's not. But during the bust period, yes, it is. So there you go. And that's why the state has to step in. And the capitalists, will the Nordic countries ever move beyond social democracy into genuine socialism? Sure. Eventually, yes. I would argue eventually they will. Absolutely. I don't know how soon, but eventually, yes. And this is what libertarians don't understand about capitalism, is they'll say that monopolies only exist because of the state. No, they think that the boom period of free competition in capitalism will just continue indefinitely. Right? This is a problem with Thomas Jefferson's yeoman theory, right? The idea that America will just be a country of small individual farmers. Well, eventually there's going to be a drought, right? Personality. Fred Hampton. Eventually there's going to be a drought, and some farms are going to get bought up by the big farms. This is the natural way the market works. All right. Look up Micah Schellenberger, pro-nuke environmental activist. There's a lot of environmentalists that are pro-nuclear power. In fact, it wasn't until oil companies started funding the environmental movement. It used to be the environmental movement were the biggest supporters of nuclear power, actually. But the oil companies largely have funded the anti-nuclear power movement because it threatens the dominance of oil. All right, workers organizing outside of unions, get around anti-union laws. Well, look, the Communist Party was always about organize the unorganized, and it was the unemployed struggles of the early 1930s that eventually gave the oomph to the strike wave of 1934. Yes, unemployed struggles, the struggles of unemployed workers, these kind of things. Yes, there are, it's not only through unions that workers are able to mobilize popular power. But that said, I mean, look, the reason that strike wave happened in 1934 was because there was a big section of the labor movement that was communist controlled. It wasn't controlled by the AFL at the time. It was controlled by communists, right? The Teamsters, the Trotskyite communists in Minneapolis, the longshore workers of San Francisco. There was a section of the labor movement that was under the control of communists. And that's what needs to happen, right? The AFL-CIA, as some people call it. I know there's a lot of revolutionaries who work within it and try to push for revolutionary policies. Good luck. I wish you luck, but I've heard it's a nightmare inside of it, right? I mean, I've heard people inside the labor movement have told me it is a nightmare to work inside the labor movement. It is Kamala Harris Incorporated inside of the labor movement right now. And if you really want to see class struggle, we've got to find a way around the labor fakers. So there you go. Are tankies and Marxist-Leninists the same thing? I wouldn't say so. I mean, there's a lot of people who call themselves Marxist-Leninists, but then hate every country that's ever put Marxism and Leninism into practice. They say, well, they like Marx, they like Lenin, but they hate the Soviet Union, they hate Cuba, they hate, So one can claim to be a Marxist-Leninist, but reject every anti-imperialist country, and so then you would not be a tanky. Tanky is a slur. It means you're a bad person because you support a socialist country. And I made a video why I'm a tanky. I think it is your responsibility to stand with countries around the world that are struggling to build socialism and struggling against imperialism. Also, what are we constantly told in the United States? Well, socialism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. And if you can't challenge the myth of the 20th century, you can't really be a communist, right? You have to stand against the myth of the 20th century. Socialism didn't fail. It turned Russia and China into superpowers. It built an amazing healthcare system in Cuba. It's raised millions of people out of poverty. I mean, communism didn't fail. So, we should not be ashamed to be tankies. You have to be a tanky to be a communist in the United States. I mean, I hate to use those terms, but it's just, that's my understanding. You have to be a tanky if you're going to be a communist in the United States, right? If you think communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried, you're not really going to be helping the communist movement. Fred Hampton. Well, there's a great documentary, The Murder of Fred Hampton, it's called, and it's footage from the Newsreel Collective, which was a group of activists with Students for a Democratic Society who just filmed a lot of Black Panther events. And in that film, The Murder of Fred Hampton, it's on YouTube, you can watch Fred Hampton. And Fred Hampton was a charismatic leader. He reminds you of Fidel Castro. He reminds you of Huey Long, or like a populist. The way he spoke to crowds, he had this charisma, and he was very young at the time he was killed. And he had this ability to kind of hold people's attention, tell jokes, and kind of smile and bring out the best in people. Fred Hampton was an amazing revolutionary leader. And go and watch the video of him. He was a charming person. He was an optimistic person, and he was definitely a communist. If you go watch that movie, go watch, the documentary where they just show footage of him talking. That man was a communist. He was definitely a communist. He was not an ID-poll liberal. He was as communist as they come. He understood Marx, Lenin, Kim Il-sung, Mao. I mean, every breath that he had was communist. So, read about Fred Hampton. And I see him as kind of like a charismatic figure, like Mao, like Fidel Castro, the kind of the personality of this kind of very effective community organizer, revolutionary, who could get along with anyone, could talk with anyone. That's how I see Fred Hampton. And on that note, folks, we have got to end. We have got to end the stream. So a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.